Within the hallowed annals of the Sons of Ultramar, there exist a great many to whom the term hero could be applied. Certainly, if the reels and screeds of the Administratum's best propagandists are to be believed, the Ultramarines themselves, as a whole, are a byword for courage and honor, that credo that they have long made one of their core principles. Certainly, in the present Imperial moment, the omnipresence of the chapter within Imperial iconography can be readily, if perhaps cynically, explained as the hand of the Primarch reborn at work. But such an explanation does dismiss the 10 millennia of presence the Ultramarines and their successors have had within the popular imagining of the Space Marine. From the dark days of the Scouring, in the aftermath of the Great Heresy, the former 13th Legion has ever ensured its centrality amongst the workings of the Imperium. It is their Primarch, of course, that wrought the Codex Astartes, that great reformative document that redefined the role of the Astartes within an Imperium that sorely distrusted them. It is perhaps then fitting that when so many within the Imperium conceive of a Space Marine, it is a scion of Robert Guilliman that comes to mind. One imagines, quite to the chagrin of other prideful chapters. Yet to descend into cynicism about this denigrates the fundamental role the chapter and its greatest members have had in the defense and shepherding of the Imperium across 10,000 years. Names that ring eternal, those of Marius Gage, Remus Ventanus, Eonid Thiel, those of ages past, are joined in the present era by Varus Tigurius, Ortan Cassius, Cato Sicarius, and Marnius Calgar. While each of these paragons rightly will fill tomes with their deeds, there is another figure to whom one's gaze will fall, for within his story is to be found struggle, temperance, and fortitude, in a manner quite epitomal of, in one's own opinion, not only his chapter of origin, but of the Astartes as a whole. It is as if he is almost the template from whence the modern Astartes should draw his goals. Know then, that this is a record of a son of Ultramar, a bearer of imperial steel through adversity into triumph, a record of Captain Demetrian Titus. Within the meticulous records of the Ultramarines Astartes chapter, the name of Demetrian Titus first appears as a neophyte, recently emerged from Astartes' ascension and 10th Company training into the chapter's 2nd Company. Born unto the agri-world of Tarentus, to a family of modest means and no great standing, the infant that was to become a Space Marine excelled within his trials, his gene seed implantation, and his later membership within the Scout Company. In a mere 50 years Terran standard, Titus had risen through the chapter to attain the rank of lieutenant within the 2nd Company, a commendable, if not outstanding, achievement amongst a fighting force as fundamentally meritocratic as the Ultramarines. The 2nd Company was one of the chapter's more mendicant battle formations, often deployed far beyond their home realm of Ultramar in order to better combat the Imperium's enemies and, importantly, project the power of the chapter far beyond its client realm. As such, however, a new 80-year-old standard Titus could only listen in horror as the first reports of Hive Fleet Behemoth emerged through the turbulent warp. Acolytes may be aware that your most humble servant has elaborated fully upon the passage of the tyrannic scourge through Ultramar in a more recent record, but it should be known here that the shadow of the warp, that malign psychic projection of the Hive Fleets, strangled astropathic distress calls from within Ultramar so wholly that the 2nd Company received word so delayed that they, despite all haste being made, arrived within the Macragge system too late to take part in the eponymous battle that ended the First Tyrannic War. Nevertheless, they, and Titus, diligently took their place in the order of battle for the subsequent xenocidal scouring campaigns to purge Ultramarian space of the lingering splinter fleets of Behemoth. Reforms were similarly undertaken amidst the wreckage of Macragge. The chapter's entire veteran First Company had been slaughtered to a man, and a void now existed that must be immediately filled by the most lauded of the surviving Ultramarines. The office of Captain of the First Company, vacant following the death of the incumbent Saul Invictus, was filled by the Second Company Captain Severus Agaman. Captain of the Second, in turn, was filled by Lucian Trajan, Senior Sergeant to the departing Agaman, who selected Titus as an attaché for his command squad. Biographers of the chapter have noted that it was during this period that Titus's heroism, leading kill teams of the Ultramarines against surviving Tyrannid elements, was first given full plaudits by his superiors, as well as the period from whence the Astartes' most distinctive trait emerged, that of his predilection for the study and assessment of the enemies of mankind through the judicious application of a chainsword at extreme close quarters. While the Ultramarines are often born in popular imagination as parodic embodiments of the diktats of the Codex Astartes, the bare reality is that their founding credo allows for a degree of personal application of its codes and laws. The ancient and guiding processes of theoretical and practical, which fundamentally underpin Ultramarine mentality, provides plenty of flexibility in how the individual Astartes seeks out raw data to inform and develop his practicals. While many senior figures would be happy to develop said from vast quantities of reported battlefield information, Demetrian Titus was noted as being remarkably straightforward in his approach, seeking new enemies personally to better learn how they fought and how they died. With the Tyranids, it should be no surprise that he found a great wealth of information, for that wretched species' hideous fecundity and blasphemous diversity of form and function knows few boundaries. Titus's after-action reports were noted as being meticulous in their specific details of Tyranid bioforms, and more specifically, their weaknesses. Adding to the great wealth of knowledge on this particular race, the chapter compiled following the Battle of Macragge. Captain Trajan and Lieutenant Titus would serve together for nearly a century, both of whom flourished under the tutelage of First Captain Agaman. Several senior chapter officials noted in dispatches during this period that Titus himself was already becoming a solid candidate for company captaincy. Yet, Titus was by all accounts firmly content in his position amongst Trajan's command squad. This forms an interesting counterpoint to the contemporaneous rise of Cato Sicarius, a proud and, it must be noted at this point in his career, quite vainglorious scion of a noble Talisarian house. The neophyte Sicarius had indeed excelled in all of his trials and his subsequent service for the chapter, meeting and indeed exceeding many of the duties that were expected of him. As an assault marine of the chapter's 8th Company during the Damocles Gulf Crusade, Sicarius distinguished himself for his near xenocidal fury against the alien Tau, but infamously for his execution of the allied Astra Militarum soldiers who he deemed to have displayed cowardice in the face of the Xenos foe. While it is far from unknown for Space Marines to enact battlefield judgment upon other, usually baseline, human soldiers, it was atypical for an Ultramarine. Sicarius was known to have vocally opined about his worthiness for captaincy of the 8th Company, but was denied by the ascension of his fellow warrior Joris Numitor to the role, the chapter command having deemed Sicarius in need of learning more humility before a leadership position could be entrusted to him. It was the humility that Sicarius lacked, and which Titus seemed to bear so naturally, that would see the lowly son of an agri-world achieve captaincy before the son of nobility. The second company, under Captain Trajan, was assigned to the defense of Beta Arcturus, which had received a missive delivered from the Ealdari of craftworld Bieltan. The declaration stated that Beta Arcturus had been long part of the Ealdari's former stellar empire, and that the Imperium would be given 1 day local standard, approximately 8 Terran hours, to fully withdraw. Naturally, the planet resisted, sending an astropathic distress call to the Ultramarines for aid. But the chapter could not arrive until 8 days after the Ealdari's deadline, finding that most of the populous planet was already ablaze under the fury of that craftworld's sword-wind hosts. While the strike cruiser Righteous Fury engaged the Asuryani starships, a demi-company, under Captain Trajan, was deployed by Drop Pod and Thunderhawk gunship to engage the ground forces. Bringing the Xenos Autarch into combat directly, Captain Trajan slew the alien warrior in single combat, while Titus's chainsword at least 3 of her life wards. However, it was discovered that the aliens had managed to capture an Ultramarines battle brother by the name of Leandros. A rescue attempt mounted by Captain Trajan proved to be a tragic trap that would lead to the death of the company captain, forcing Titus to assume brevet battlefield command of the situation. The repulse of the Ealdari attack on Beta Arcturus was ultimately a success, yet another mark of Titus's suitability for senior command. His humility would no longer be permitted to bar his ascension to the role. Upon the successful conclusion of the campaign, Chapter Master Marnius Calgar made the brevet promotion permanent. Titus succeeded his mentor Trajan as captain of the second company once the departed Astartes had been interred within the fortress of Hera. Titus's decade-long tenure in the role was marked by diligent service to the chapter and Imperium against the forces of the alien and the heretic, with the new captain being a model for unpretentious and quiet dedication to duty. Privately, several senior figures within the chapter, notably First Captain Agaman, praised Titus for what he considered to be exemplary and self-effacing service, caring only for the successes of the mission at hand, with all thoughts of personal glory seemingly the furthest thing from his consideration. Such leadership would continue until Captain Titus personally led a strike force to relieve the forge world of Gria, which had come under sustained invasion by the orcs of Wa Grimskull. The interdiction operation was to prove seismic in the life of the captain. Given the Xenos' observed tendencies, it had been assumed that their invasion was to obtain advanced Imperial weapons and ammunition that such a forge world produced in vast quantities, including the seizure of a Warlord-class battle titan currently under repair. It was, however, ultimately revealed that the invasion had been orchestrated by a heretic Astartes sorcerer known as Nemeroth. By directing the orcs against the Imperium's defenders, Nemeroth hoped to engender such destruction and confusion, as the orcoid species is known to create, that his warband could bypass the normally staunch security of the forges, and obtaining an artifact known as the Psychic Scourge, a device of devastating potential that the Graian Magi had been researching. While Nemeroth was brought to ultimate defeat by Captain Titus's efforts, and the sorcerer's schemes were foiled, Titus himself displayed a startling ability to resist the heretic's psychic assaults, being seemingly immune to much of the sorcerer's warp-born malefica. This engendered a deep suspicion within Titus's attendant battle brother Leandros, that selfsame Leandros that his former captain had rescued from Eldari hands a decade before. Remarkably Puritan in his character, for even an Astartes, Leandros suspected his captain to be bearing the seed of corruption, one that allowed him to sustain against the powers of the warp. Owing to this, and Leandros' private convictions that, during the Graian campaign, Titus had disobeyed many of the tenets of the Codex during the prosecution, the battle brother reported his misgivings to Inquisitor Thrax of the Ordo Malleus, present upon Gria following the revelations of the Hand of Chaos-aligned Astartes. Despite Titus's heroism in the face of both orc invasion and heretic scheming, and him having been responsible, personally, for the death of not only the Orc war boss, but the Chaos Sorcerer, the Inquisitor detained him, backed up by an escort of Black Templar Astartes, all upon suspicion of warp corruption. It is from this point that Captain Titus disappears wholly from Ultramarine records. His conduct on Gria, the last item in his service record, its successful conclusion almost wholly absent from the honor roll of the Second Company. In an ironic twist of fate, Cato Sicarius, who had long since been champing at the bit for promotion, was elevated to the captaincy of the company following Titus's immediate departure. The former captain was stripped of all rank and authority within the custody of the Inquisition. By records recently obtained by the Logos Historica Vertia, it is possible to determine that Titus spent nearly a century in the custody of Inquisitor Thrax, with the Puritan Inquisitor subjecting him to all manner of scrutiny as he attempted to discover Titus's ability to withstand the warp. He was no blank, that was certain, the pariah gene obviously wholly absent from his Astartes physiology. Instead, Titus was subjected to every invasive procedure and scrutiny the minds of so experienced an inquisitor as Thrax could devise. He was subjected to mind trawling. He was psychically scourged by all manner of sanctioned practitioner, all in an attempt to parse out the possible corruption within the fabric of his soul. It is likewise recorded that, during his period of public disavowal, that the chapter master Marnius Calgar quietly made numerous positions to the Ordo Melius for information about Titus's captivity, as well as demands for his return to the chapter, claiming that the Inquisition had long since surpassed its authority with such a long detention. It is possible that these requests were simply lost within the grinding wheels of the Imperium's clogged and inefficient bureaucracy, yet one believes it is far more likely they fell on willfully deaf ears. The Inquisition was not, by any means, breaching the bounds of its authority in Titus's capture. It may have been somewhat unprecedented, yes, but nevertheless was entirely justified within the powers the Holy Ordos possess. Inquisitor Thrax himself is a rather interesting figure. Having served as Inquisitor in Ordinary for more than 400 years, he was a highly experienced figure within the sector's Ordo Melius, nay, the Segmentum's Ordo, with the length of his tenure and the breadth of enemies that he had felled, having made him a highly conservative and Puritan individual even by that Ordo's standards, likely influenced by having been brought to tenure under the tutelage of the legendary demon hunter, Inquisitor Faust. Thrax also considered himself a student of history, and from such studies had long since inculcated within him a quite radical position for such a reactionary, that the Adeptus Astartes represented a threat to humanity almost as severe as the Warp and the Dark Pantheon within. This in and of itself is not unknown amongst members of the Inquisition, many of whom see their nature as baseline humans to be closer to the designs of the Emperor than the master of mankind's gene-wrought angels of death. Many Inquisitors, indeed, take it upon themselves to monitor Astartes chapters within their local volumes, given their total oversight authority over all bodies within the Imperium. This Thrax had taken upon himself to do, particularly those chapters operating within his native Segmentum Tempestus. Thus, this particular Inquisitor wedded the deep distrust of the Warp's powers with an inherent suspicion of the Adeptus Astartes. It sealed Titus's fate before they had even encountered one another. While Titus lay in imprisonment within the Inquisitor's cells, Thrax's many efforts to discover the source of his unnatural resistance to the warp bore no fruit whatsoever. The Inquisitor continued his zealous watch upon other chapters of the Astartes, perhaps in denied frustration. He was amongst the most vocal of the early voices raised against the actions of the Astral Claws and the Maelstrom Warders, a voice that grew all the louder when Huron self-proclaimed himself as the tyrant of Badab and the eventual secession from the Imperium. In the fires of the ensuing Badab War, Inquisitor Thrax saw his worst suspicions and fears of Astartes' overreach and independence play out on a massive scale, deepening his fervent hatred of the Angels of Death. He would subsequently declare no less than 6 chapters excommunicate traitores within the span of a century, an almost unprecedented number for a single inquisitor. Upon the return of the chronologically displaced Darnath Lysander of the Imperial Fists, lost within the depths of the warp for centuries, Thrax was fervently vocal in his demands to personally establish the Space Marines' purity, his petitions silenced only by the personal intervention of the Inquisitorial representative to the High Lords of Terra. Thrax's zeal would ultimately lead to his death, his downfall occurring as he personally led a force of Grey Knights against the fortress monastery of the Grey Slayers chapter. Their fief having fallen to the ruinous powers and its rot having infected their chapter, Thrax was quite justified in seeking their extermination, but was caught unawares by their actual powers. The Inquisitor was possessed by a demon of the warp, summoned by one of the degenerate chapter's librarians, his own ferment mind falling to corruption and usurpation. The Grey Knights accompanying him butchered his rebellious flesh without a second's consideration. As is customary in the death of so high-profile an Inquisitor, a conclave of his contemporaries within the Ordo Malleus was gathered to conclude his affairs, pursue his investigations, and dispose of any potentially dangerous loose ends left in the wake of his passing. A strike force from the Red Hunter Astartes chapter was dispatched to secure his holdings, lest any artifacts or prisoners escape inquisitorial jurisdiction. Within a remote watch station in the galactic south that Thrax had long claimed as a personal fief, the Red Hunters discovered almost 100 Astartes prisoners locked within stasis cells, secured from the passage of time by arcane technologies. That a single Inquisitor had secured so many prisoners, Emperor's Angels all, for apparently indefinite detention, with no recourse to the chapter's concerns, broached territory of concern. The Inquisitor responsible for this arm of the investigation, unwilling to create further tension with nearly 20 separate chapters of the Adeptus Astartes, moved to cover up the shame of her colleague. Instead of disposing of the captives by standard practice, Titus and many other warriors of chapters who Thrax had been unable to conclusively prove the corruption of were conveyed to the nearby watch station of the Deathwatch. Titus's incarceration, from punitive mental assaults to long years spent within stasis, had rendered him a man out of time. His surrender to Thrax on Gria had been born of dedication to both duty and authority. He had recognized Thrax's ultimate oversight over even one such as him, and had been unwilling to stain the reputation of the Ultramarines by publicly confronting so powerful an Inquisitor. While Titus emerged from captivity a changed man, his sense of duty nevertheless persisted, and after careful examination by the Deathwatch, he entered their service as a Black Shield. While retention of his Ultramarine heritage would have been fully permitted, Titus had received no word, nor reprieve, from his captivity at the hands of Thrax from any of his erstwhile brethren. His presumption was that his conduct had shamed his chapter, and that if his dismissal had not been formal, it was nevertheless implied. He determined himself unworthy of the legacy of Guilliman, setting upon a life as a Black Shield, scouring his armor of its lineage, setting aside his own name, displaying, it must be noted, the same total lack of ego that had typified his service to the Imperium up to this point. He took the name Nullus, resolving to fight alongside his Kill Team brothers and likely die in the service of the Deathwatch. Shortly into Nullus's tenure amongst the Imperium's foremost alien hunters, the high fleets of the Tyranids emerged from a wholly new vector. Whereas High Fleet Behemoth had been a single, massive invasion of one specific Imperial volume, and High Fleet Kraken had mounted a broad assault upon an entire galactic front, tendrils of High Fleet Leviathan now began to emerge from below the galactic plane, striking the Imperium far beyond the eastern fringe territories the Xenos had heretofore only been encountered in. With the Imperium's customary heavy-handed control of information having been in full effect following the Battle of Macragge and the emergence of Kraken, loyal forces galaxy-wide were sorely lacking in experience and intel on fighting the Xenos menace. The same pattern of disarray, confusion, and defeat that had typified the emergence of the first two Hive fleets was now being repeated across Segmentum's Pacificus and Solar in the face of Leviathan. As for many, this was the first time they had encountered or even heard of this pernicious Xenos. The exception to this was the Deathwatch, whose kill teams had been ranged against the Tyranids for well over a century, and whose dissemination of alien-killing data and tacticae amongst their number was dazzlingly efficient by the standards of the Imperium. As Solblade task forces were being gathered by Terra, the Deathwatch rapidly gathered as many brethren across as many watch fortresses as were within response distance to counteract Leviathan's invasion. Nullus was dispatched alongside the rest of Kill Team Caesaren to the Residius system, ordered to assist beleaguered Astra Militarum forces already bled dry by the demands of the Indomitus Crusade. During operations on this world, Nullus fell in battle against a Tyranid Carnifex, only to be rescued by his former Ultramarine brothers newly arrived in system, just before the beast could land a killing blow. Such was the scale of Leviathan's invasion that distress calls had been sent as far as possible abroad across the Imperium, the effort burning out several sector astropath choirs in the process. While Ultramar itself still bore the scars of its recent conflict with the heretic Death Guard during the Plague Wars, its Astartes could not countenance the re-emergence of the Tyranid threat unopposed, not when so many veterans of the First Tyrannic War still served and still thirsted for vengeance. First Captain Agaman, newly appointed as a Tetrarch of Konor following the return of Reboot Gulliman to waking life, assembled a task force and made full wake to the Bastior subsector, the linchpin of Imperial defenses against Leviathan. Alongside him came Varro Tigurius, the chief librarian of the chapter and the only Astartes alive known to have survived mental communion with the hive mind directly. It was Tigurius who detected, deep in meditation, the sole sign of a warrior the chapter had long thought lost. Even as a shadow of the warp clouded his witch sight, the venerable librarian scried the unmistakable bearing of Titus. It was aboard the Righteous Fury, the same strike cruiser that had borne him to duties far afield a lifetime ago, that Titus was to undergo the so-called Calgarian rites. Deemed wounded so grievously that the rites were his only chance of survival, Titus was subjected to the process that would see him transformed into a Primaris Space Marine, his Astartes physiology elevated so that he may take his place within this new age of eternal war. Following his short convalescence, Titus was reacquainted with his old captain Agaman, and was examined finally by Tigurius himself for any trace of taint or corruption, the suspicion of which still dogged him over a century later. Having found nothing beyond a pure imperial soul, Tigurius recommended to Chapter Master Calgar that Titus be immediately reinstated to full active duty. Appointed he was, although under the admittedly reduced rank of lieutenant, pending his appraisal in active combat once again. The Ultramarines may have been joyous at the return of a lost brother so long gone, yet their standards remained as exacting as ever. Titus would once more be dispatched to earn captaincy, if indeed he was worthy of it. Placed under the leadership of 2nd Company Captain Sevastus Asheran, Titus was immediately placed into service against the Tyranid menace that still assailed the Bastior sub. His skills at alien murder, now Deathwatch honed, were sorely needed, although his past, beyond his time as Nullus, was ordered to be kept secret at the behest of the company's zealous chaplain, a hardline warrior who yet harbored the doubt of the faithful that the miraculous return of Titus was indeed a gift from the Emperor. The defense of Bastior is a tale of redemption through adversity, even for one so powerful as a Space Marine. Titus comported himself admirably, alongside Sergeant Valorum Gadriel and battle brother Medurus Chiron. His companions and he formed as an ad hoc kill team along a quasi-Deathwatch and, notably, quite codex antithetical pattern, delaying the predatory probing of the Tyranid swarms enough to permit civilian evacuation of major population centers. The past, however, was not done with Titus, and once more the hand of the archenemy was at play. Sinister machinations on behalf of the Thousand Sons heretic Astartes Legion had been manipulating events in order to gain access to Project Aurora, the Adeptus Mechanicus of the sector having renewed their research into the arcane device that Titus had come into contact with upon Gria. With the intervention of Chapter Master Calgar, Titus and the Ultramarines were able to deny the depredations of the Thousand Sons once again, casting their sorcerer and his summoned greater demon into the depths of the warp. His actions in the Bastior subsector, alongside a later notable success on Za-Uj, saw Titus fully absolved in the eyes of his brothers. All suspicion of his past was finally placed aside, even by the company's chaplain, who revealed himself following the victory as none other than Leandros, whose actions had placed Titus in that very position in the first place. Second, Captain Asheran's fall on the hive world of Trieg at the hands of Genestealer cultists gave Chapter Master Calgar the opportunity to return Titus to leadership once more. Granting him the captaincy of the Second Company, Titus was additionally granted the title of Captain of the Watch. Traditionally, a largely ceremonial role as Warden of the Chapter's Fortress Monastery, the pressing needs of the era Indomitus had encouraged the Primarch Reborn to reform its responsibilities, at least where they pertained to the Ultramarines. Titus, as Master of the Watch, was granted the responsibility of leading a renewed push to make safe and defend the realm of Ultramar in its entirety, and, if possible, to reclaim parts of its volume long fallen away from the Emperor's light. While once known as the 500 Worlds during the Great Crusade, the reality of Ultramar is that in the present era it has been far since diminished. The depredations of the Plague Wars are but one of its many travails, yet it remains a strategically vital bastion of Imperial dominion. Its proximity to the Tau Empire, the Ghoul Stars, and both the Sautek and Nihilak dynasties of the Necrons make its security a paramount concern in the minds of Imperial strategos, including the Primarch himself. To its defense, Titus has come to apply himself. The eyes of many within his chapter once again fall upon his shoulders. But for tales of Ultramarines' comportment in this campaign, one must beg the Acolyte's pardon. The hour grows late, and your most humble servant must commit himself to a modicum of rest. Until next time, Ave Imperator, ut gloria in excelsis terra. This video and this channel were made possible thanks to the very kind donations and support from my Patreon subscribers. If you'd like to help support the channel, head on over to patreon.com/Oculus Imperia. If you'd like to receive more updates about the channel and any future videos, you can contact me or follow me on Twitter @Oculus Imperia. Otherwise, please like, subscribe, comment, let me know your feedback, and as ever, thank you very much for watching.